We've driven almost all the way around here. The next mountain range along the Crosscut Range, second time we've seen it today out of three. And the very head of the valley with a rocky triangular top and glaciers beneath, that's Mount Talbot, and we got glaciers to the left hand side of it as well. So this valley, as you can see, is U-shaped. It's got a flat valley floor, steep mountains around here, typical of one carved out by glaciers. So a big glacier formed either side of Mount Talbot and filled this valley with ice, carving it out. It extended out over our heads the opposite direction to which we're travelling, got to the divide, took a left hand turn, went down the beech forest at Lower Hollyford that we saw a few minutes ago. Now with the mountains growing really quickly, they fall down equally quick as well. 1/3 of the annual growth of these mountains lost to erosion. Forms of erosion we get here. Wind and rain doesn't really erode these rocks too much, it's very solid. But to the right here, you can see in the shade lots of loose rocks. It's a scree slope, all the rock that's tumbled down from Mount Crosscut over the years. I'll tell you why in a second. But in the meantime, out to the left here, this very steep mountainside, imagine an avalanche rumbling and rolling down that mountain face directly across the road here every single winter. We're just travelling through the raspberry patch. This is one of the most active avalanche paths on the Milford Road, directly in the path of an avalanche just here. Tumbles down, so reducing the altitude of the mountain. So all the rock on the right hand side has tumbled down from Mount Crosscut over the years. So 1/3 of the growth of the mountains lost to erosion, but geologists reckon if there was no such thing as erosion, these mountains would be 22,000 metres high. That's about 7 or 8 minutes here to hang about at the Homer Tunnel having a look around. So as we climb up, I'll point out some features. We've got all the original ocean floor, the layers in the rock, some wet patches on the rock, temporary waterfalls, one permanent waterfall here, just a trickle there today, which is fed by the glaciers. So
this is a one-way tunnel. And this nice sign over here tells us how long before we'll be able to go through. In the meantime, we get to see all this debris that's come down the mountains. And the snow up on top. And a little bit of a waterfall. This side of the mountains has a lot more green and moss and trees and stuff. Because the water coming off the Pacific Ocean, it's here, drops of rain, the other side's drier. There's a huge rock that came down at some point. There's some pretty big ones in there, but that one's probably the biggest.
Milford, pretty steep climb a bit later. This saddle of granite rock through which we're travelling, it was identified by a man called William Homer back in the 1880s as the narrowest piece of rock that needed piercing to give access by road from Tiana through to Milford Sound. He presented the plans. They were forgotten about until the 1930s. During the Great Depression, the available labour here to put the tunnel through and the road through. Now they had to build the road through to here, of course, reached here in the late 1930s, the Tiana side of the Homer Saddle. Shortly afterwards, a team of just 5 people chipping away at the rock, pickaxes, shovels, hammers and chisels to put the tunnel through. Joined by a bigger group of people, however, they all left during the 1940s, the World War II. Returning at the end of the 1940s, continuing to dig their way through, reaching daylight in the Cleddau Valley in 1952. It took them a further 2 years to stabilise loose rock around to make it safe for vehicles to travel through. It was opened in 54. As you can see around us, big bright light coming, you'll see it is bare rock the very same way as when they chipped it out by hand in the 30s, 40s and 50s. Oh, here we go. So they used pickaxes, shovels, hammers and chisels, using horses and carts to drag up any debris out of the tunnel. They used dynamite for some stubborn sections, but they were digging downhill. But they had major problems with groundwater. Now there are cracks in the rock through which water trickles, and as we travel down through here, you might hear some water hitting the roof. There should be some in a second or two. The water that flowed into the tunnel flowed downhill as well, flooding the very face of rock they were digging away, and there's more water there. So to combat this, they used big pumps, pumping about 4,000 gallons of water out of the tunnel during the time of its construction. So right at the end of the tunnel, don't worry if you're claustrophobic, we've only got about 940 metres of granite rock above our head, or so. So yeah, but right at the end of the tunnel, however, at the entrance or exit of the tunnel, there are roadworks. Now I don't know how you feel about roadworks, but they make me angry. So I've got my eyes closed behind my glasses here. Hopefully I remember which way the road goes. I do order you to close your eyes as well. If I hear any oohs, ahs or wows, I'll know you're cheating. You're going to have to walk from here. Keep your eyes closed for a second. Play the game. Roadworks. Make me mental. Just keep your eyes closed just for a second or two. Righto, turn your head to your left and open your eyes. Kia ora, welcome to the Cleddau Valley. the Valley of 1,000 Waterfalls. Now it's quite dry today. If we had some rainfall, it would take about 20 minutes for waterfalls to start tumbling down, but they dry up just as quick. But you will still have a few little trickles of water coming down here. That face there, it's called Postman's Descent. When they were building the tunnel, they had a really brave postman, and he would climb up the Tiano side of the Humber saddle, and he'd put the nail into a bag, he'd attach it to a rope, and he'd lower it down this side. It's called the Postman's Descent. Good old postman Pat, he was pretty brave.
The tunnel's back up beyond there. Let's see the entrance from here. This is a hairpin turn road going down. We'll be going down the sea level.
So during the ice ages, lots of snow fell, and the temperature never rose high enough between the seasons in those ice ages for all the snow to melt away. So we had year upon year of snow, layer upon layer of snow, all falling down. The layers that fell on top compacted the layers below and squeezed out the air pockets between the snowflakes, forming very solid ice, and this ice called a glacier. Now gravity took over, and this big block of ice began to slide its way down through the rocks that carved out this U-shaped valley that we're travelling through. So take a profile of the valley. It's got the very steep mountain-sized flat valley floor because it is sloping towards the ocean. So typical of one carved out by a glacier.
We're at 829 meters above the water in Milford Sound at sea level.
And as it eroded, as it was heading on down through the valley, it was joined by other glaciers that were carving out other valleys. These glaciers all collided, and they formed one massive glacier. It did slide right out off the southwest coast of the South Island into the Tasman Sea. As it eroded down, it carved it below sea level. About 15 to 20,000 years ago, temperatures began to rise. The glacier, as glaciers do, began to melt and retreating back up from the ocean right up along this valley, completely melted away. But as it retreated from the ocean, the water from the Tasman Sea, the ocean, came in to flood any parts of the valley that were below sea level. This formed a flooded ice-carved valley, which is called a fjord. That fjord is nowadays known as Milford Sound. So Milford Sound is a fjord. It's a valley carved out by ice, by a glacier, then flooded by water. Now, Sound is a different type of valley. A Sound is a valley carved out by a river of running water, not frozen water, and then flooded by other water like the ocean. So if you have travelled around New Zealand, if you caught the ferry from Wellington to Picton, from the north to the South Island of New Zealand, on the last 1.5 hours of your voyage on the ferry, you were travelling through and sailing through a valley called Queen Charlotte Sound. Perfect example of a sound, a V-shaped valley carved out by running water and then flooded by the ocean. Milford Sound is not a sound, it's a fjord, because it was created by ice. If that is the case, why is it called Milford Sound? Why is it not called Milford Fjord? The reason for that, it was mistakenly named a sound before the word fjord became part of the English language. Fjord is a Norwegian term translating to mean step. That's why when this area became a national park back in the 1950s, they decided to compensate for that mistake. They gave it the name Fiordland National Park to make sure we understood there are fjords, there are valleys carved out by ice, flooded by the ocean, and not sounds which are carved out by rivers of running water, then flooded. Whatever river. And we're just about to cross over the Dawn River, which tends to run just a tiny shade clearer, a very subtle difference between the colours of these two rivers. So Dawn River drains mostly glaciers and snowfields further up along the valley, while the Gulliver River drains the forest floor.